and welcome to the fourth episode of our weekly podcast, Just Politics, Our Worldview, where we discuss politics in Barbados, the region, and the rest of the world. Remember that you can find us here live every Sunday from 5 to 7 p.m. When you join the program, please share so that others can also join, and you can do your part to help to increase our viewership. I am Ayo Olalara, and this is my co-host, Dr. Terry Harris. Good evening, Terry.
Hey, Ayo. Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to the show. So this week we have a guest who needs no real introductions. We have Peter Wickham, a popular political scientist, pollster, and also the principal of Cadres, a polling company here in our region. He's also known throughout the region for accurately calling elections. He's also an outspoken and down-to-earth host on the popular program Down to Brass Tacks with VOB 92.9. Peter, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So this week's topic is the debrief, where we are going to be discussing the fallout from the several elections that we've had in North America. You know, Trump is hanging on, or trying to hang on. We have St. Vincent, where we now have a five-star general, self-styled, and, you know, the other implications of the elections that have happened and are about to happen. So this week, the debrief, and this week's episode is brought to us by Debrief Properties, Inc., for construction, interior and building design, as well as a whole host of other building needs, right? So I'll just plug them for a little bit. Here. So Desert Properties Inc. If you want a bathroom that looks like this one, you can contact them. Is that right, Ayo?
Definitely.
Okay. All right. All right, so back over to you, Ayo.
Thank you, Terry. All right. So, of course, you guys know what we're going to do right now, and this is the weekly roundup. In Barbados, the St. George North by-election comes to an end in 4 days after a series of political platforms, religious political platforms, a debate that turned into a comedy show, the first all-woman political platform anywhere, lectures on basic reading and pedigree, and so much more. In the end, we will have a winner, and I'm sure that you are just as anxious as I am. And over in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, they have a new prime minister. Well, not really, but the comrade has once again wrested power for another 4 years from the hands of lawyer Mr. Friday. Peter will tell us a bit more on the election of the five-star general in a little bit later. And in the United States of America, Trump's response to the election results proved to be a bigger and better comedy show than the St. George North election debates. He threw all of his toys out of the crib, and he even broke a few. And I'm just surprised that a man who prepays his taxes didn't advise his followers to pre-vote. But how could he? The pandemic was a hoax, right? And then after he caught the coronavirus, he decided that it wasn't as serious, but simply a flu. And he basically gave up on containment and started to focus on a vaccine. He advised his voters to vote on election day and not to trust the mail-in ballots in the middle of a pandemic. So that's what they did, like the little soldiers. And then he lived to regret it slowly, gloriously, beautifully, and bigly. And he's now refusing to concede to President-elect Joe Biden.
Is that a surprise?
But the presidential election in the United States has pretty much ended, and people want to move on. The question is, when will the Biden-Harris win? Will the Biden-Harris win help to heal the chasm that has become so obvious under Trump's reign? Joe Biden's campaign dubbed this election the fight for the soul of America, and I couldn't help but think how apt that was trying to remember if the soul was lost with the wiping out of the first people, African slavery, Jim Crow, overwhelming police brutality, or just the election of Donald Trump. All of these were significant instances where the search for a soul should have begun. Nonetheless, I certainly hope that the current leaders can help to unite the country, bring some sanity where there's only madness, and be the world leader that they always purport to be. The reality is that 70 million people voted to retain Donald Trump as president, and that says something. But anyway, here are some of the best memes from the internet this week in politics. You guys know I love my memes. And of course, counting, mailing votes proved to be the hardest job of the election. So they had to call an expert. And like a strong Black woman, the mail-in ballot simply refused to be talked over.
Are you still
speaking?
And
the pro-life folk somehow proved to not be quite pro-vote and needed a reminder. So Joe Prano said, let me put it this way, let me put it in a way that Republicans can understand. A vote's life begins when it's put in the envelope. It's against God's will to kill it before it's counted. And Trump threatened to leave the country if he lost, and Biden encouraged him. Biden, that's funny to me. It's corny to you guys. It's really funny to me. And even Ronald Adams over here in Barbados, he weighed in on what it would take for Trump to win the election. He said to win from here, Trump has to carry Georgia, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and St. George North.
Sounds about right.
Well done, Adams. And then Trump sought the help of an expert, unsuccessfully so. And now we're on to a new beginning, and this, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of an era. And on that note, here ends the weekly roundup. Viewers, please note that you also have the opportunity to ask questions and contribute on the program as usual with your comments. Simply type them into the comment section below, WhatsApp us on 833-9886, or email us at jpourworldview@gmail.com. And please keep sharing this live and keep liking our page as we attempt to grow as organically as possible. We appreciate you, we appreciate your help and your support. And now on to the main program. Gentlemen, Peter, you've been waiting a while. It's quite late where you are, so we're just gonna move right in to this evening's topic really. So the US elections are finally over. Hopefully it's over, and it seems like this election went on for quite some time, or perhaps we just have fewer things to focus on because we're all kind of quiet because of the coronavirus. Joe Biden is the president-elect, and Trump is refusing to concede. The United States is a country that is intriguing to me at best. It's like a dichotomy of sorts, a country that it somehow manages to be simultaneously distressing and awe-inspiring. For 4 years, many in the United States were allowed to openly spit vitriol at anyone who didn't meet their preferred religious or racial characteristics. There were numerous police killings, brutality, predominantly among Black Americans, regressive and backward ideas and thinking. And then yesterday, we watched the culmination of a long and hard-fought election. Biden dubbed it for the soul of the country. We saw people of all races and religions come together in the highest numbers historically to oust Donald Trump from the White House, because majority of the people simply wanted a return to some type of normalcy, which for many means a chance to continue to do the work towards equity for disenfranchised people, because by any stretch of the imagination, things were never perfect for people of color under Trump. and they're only, sorry, for people of color before Trump. And under Trump, they only regressed further. One may argue that Biden was elected to remove Trump or not, and maybe not necessary to elect Biden. The more progressive liberals, especially among the millennials, seemed to originally prefer Bernie Sanders and AOC, but the NC, they chose Biden-Harris. Now, this raises the question of whether people truly choose the leaders that they want, or whether they simply choose between
the options
those who are offered, right? Another thing that I want to make mention of is the overwhelming assistance that Biden got from the Black community, especially Black women. Predominantly Black women were out in the numbers on the ground working to get Biden-Harris elected, not just Kamala, but women like Stacey Adams, was a general in Georgia, bringing out 80,000 new voters to flip the state. AKA and other Greek organizations all over organized and launched voter registration efforts in support of their sorority sister, Kamala, and Patrice Cullors and Alicia Garcia, who co-founded the Black Lives Matter organization. They turned that pressure group into a real political movement that helped to turn out voters in numbers, mostly in response to the killing of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and countless others killed by police brutality. We also had Caroline Carruthers, I think that's how you pronounce her name. She's with she's director of the Black Youth Project. Angela Davis, we all know her, renowned activist and academic. Even Cardi B, Beyonce, Rihanna, of course, and all those others that rallied and campaigned for and brought out the votes in the country to elect this new duo. The end result is that approximately 95% of Black women and approximately 80% of Black men voted for Democrats this year. In addition to numerous Latinos, and we can ignore the Cubans in Florida, and many other people of color. Black America and other people of color and other right-thinking Americans needed to get Trump out of office. And here's where I have difficulty with Biden's cry that the election was for the soul of America. America is inherently racist and disproportionately so towards Black people. Black women are warriors and they're relentless and they make it happen at all costs. But even in our 95% Black island, many never really get the credit that they deserve. And this is why I really want to take a moment to acknowledge those warriors who helped to elect the president-elect of the United States. Yeah, good. So I can stop now. I can stop gushing. Okay, Peter. So the US having a new president, one of the first things that I thought about was that even if the United States doesn't heal its internal fractures, that its international relations would start to heal and move in the right direction again. Trump for 4 years ignored norms and treaties. For instance, he pulled out of the Paris Agreement and the Iran nuclear deal, actions that effectively made null and void years of diplomatic work. With his America First approach to policy, he kind of personified the idea that interests are eternal, but allies are not. You know that saying? But America's role was usually to lead on many of these agreements. Do you think that U.S. transatlantic relationships will be repaired, or will allies be more cautious now about the amount of power that they let go to the United States?
Well, no, I think that U.S. relations with everyone is going to be repaired, quite frankly. One of the big challenges with Donald Trump's presidency was a lack of predictability. He tore up the script regarding North Korea. He tore up the script regarding Iran. He tore up the script regarding, you mentioned several instances in which just now he took a position that was uncharacteristic and it was unpredictable. And if it is one thing that I believe his absence will bring back to the foreign relations is a level of certainty and predictability. So when you're negotiating peace in the Middle East, it will not be about Donald Trump and Kushner and the need to create an environment where it makes them appear good. When you are negotiating with a dictator in North Korea, you're not going to be trying to make a statement that you have been able to solve a problem that was historic, and you'll be able to become bosom buddies with a dictator who everyone else refused to speak to. So I think there will be some level of predictability, and I think there'll be cohesion, and I think that the world will be able to move generally speaking, in a slightly more understandable manner. The one challenge I do see, well, let's say there are two things. One it relates to the Caribbean, the other one as it relates to the United Kingdom. I believe that the UK was hedging their bets on the hope that if Trump returned, he would fast track some kind of a trade deal for America. Frankly, I'm not really sure whether he really would have, but I think that this was their hope. So maybe they have had a vested interest, but they have already congratulated Biden. I think that it will be harder for them to negotiate a good trade deal with Biden in there, simply because, excuse me, he is not as enthusiastic about the UK presidency and their post-Brexit relations as Trump might have been. And then there's Guyana, but that's Caribbean politics, and maybe we may want to talk about that a little later. But I do feel that there were concerns in Guyana that the hostility that he showed towards the PNU coalition was such that he may have difficulties relating to the current government, the PPP Civic, which the Trump administration had cozied up to. So I don't know whether people are curious to know whether or not there will be a similar warrant from the Biden side. I personally feel that there will be, and whether why the Biden will be as anxious to get engaged with Trump as the others. So that's just my general thing of it. But I think that they're going to be probably 80 or 90% positives. And if there are some drawbacks, there will be small matters.
I want to pick you up on 2 points there, Peter, concerning the likely fall, I guess, in U.S. relations with the rest of the world, given Biden-Harris presidency, with the possibility that there could be a 2024 run by Trump and a return of Trumpism to the White House. Do you really think that in the meantime, the world is going to, I guess, forgive and forget what has happened in the last traumatic 4 years?
Yeah. No, I honestly don't know. I mean, Trump may very well harbor ideas of returning, but again, it's difficult for me to see a situation in which he could be reelected to the United States of America. A big part about Trump's demise politically is that it's now going to start a whole range of problems that he never anticipated before. So when you're president, you can keep people from seeing your tax returns, you can keep people from dealing with prosecutions and so on. When the impeachment hearing was conducted, the lawyers were making it clear that a number of the things that he is not going to be held accountable for, he won't be held accountable for because he is president. I think he can be held accountable for them after. My feeling is that he will become very busy shortly, defending himself in different theaters. Right. And against that background, I don't know that he can have any time for politics really, and to make a serious run. So I think that he's pretty much gone. I don't think anybody in the world is really expecting that he's going to come back in 4 years and retake the presidency. This thing was a mistake. And I do feel that the more people think about it, the more they're going to realize that the world is really a lot better off with this current president than the previous one.
Right.
Well, the incoming president in the previous one.
Right. And so America had made their mistake, which is completely reversible within 4 years. But you also touched on Brexit, a mistake, in my opinion, that is not looking likely to reverse. And you're quite right. I think that the administration here was hoping that maybe Trump could win, and he would fast track this new deal. But with Biden in office and Biden is also of Irish American background, so he's very well aware of the implications that the agreement, the burgeoning agreement between the EU and the UK has for the Northern Ireland situation. Now, what do you think could be the dynamic there? So he may not fast track a deal. In fact, he may actually oppose the current position of the UK government vis-a-vis Northern Ireland and the trade implications there. So what do you think could be the fallout from that in the UK-US relationship?
Yeah, it's interesting, because your prime minister, and I say your prime minister because you're in the
prime minister is
you're interim prime minister. Yeah, no, Boris Johnson is playing a very, very dangerous game.
Right.
He is antagonizing a lot of the leaders in Europe, and he is presenting an argument that is difficult to sustain. His most recent shenanigan was this thing where he decided that he's going to take action that he knows to be illegal.
Yes.
And he's going to challenge, Europe to take him to court. You do that when you have a plan and you have a fairly clear idea on what you can achieve. But my understanding of it is that if the UK leaves without a deal, the UK hurts more than the European Union does. The European Union is a very large and powerful body economically, and they can do some serious damage to the UK if they're not careful. And I think this idea that the UK can just sail on and negotiate trade deals with other people advantageously. Look, when it comes down to it, I cannot see the European Union allow Britain to become an attractive offshore destination right on its doorstep with direct access to Europe and giving people advantageous trade deals and so on. I can't see the European Union allow it. I think that they're going to cause the UK to hurt a bit. And they were perhaps hedging their bets on the fact that they may have a partner in the United States of America that may want to work with them. But I would be very surprised if Boris Johnson doesn't start to do some heavy duty begging, and probably not in an open manner. But this bravado that he's coming with and this talk that, he's going to pull out and he's prepared to leave without a deal and he will break the law if necessary. Yeah. When it comes down to it, I don't think that he's going to go in that direction. I think he's going to find a way to negotiate. He still has some time, and I think he will perhaps start to make some serious concessions that would allow him to emerge with something significant in terms of a deal. I mean, he has to leave. But like you, I think it was a huge mistake. I believe this is not the time in the world to break apart places of the world. It's a time to put them together. But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. The decision was taken and they had to go with it. And we'll see now what happens, what the consequences are.
Yeah. I do think that there will be serious consequences if Boris persists with this the idea that he is going to act illegally vis-a-vis the agreement in Northern Ireland, because this is where this Brexit arrangement all kind of hinges and where the shit hits the fan, for lack of a better term, on this. Because of course the agreement in Northern Ireland is that they're going to have a seamless border. There not going to be any checks. And one of the major implications of the deal that is currently being promulgated from what they would like to be agreed by the European Union is that there will be checks, but there won't really be checks. This phantom border that suggests that there will be actual checks on the island border, and that flies in the face of the Good Friday Agreement. And given Biden's Irish American background and his clear interest, unlike Trump, Biden actually knows what the Good Friday Agreement is going to be about, right? Yeah. Knows what's in it, and given Biden's interest in Ireland and historic familial links there, I don't think he'll tolerate any such agreement any such position with the UK government, particularly not if they're asking America for a good trade deal. So I think you're quite right. They'll have to give up on a lot of that, a lot of the policies that they know are trying to get the European Union to agree to.
Yeah, no, I mean, you were not wrong when there was the North-South, debacle over the years. I was very, very young at the time, but it was pretty bad, and I don't think that anybody wants to go back to those days where there was a border, and the absence of a border has made life so much easier. Why would you want to go back? I don't think that Boris Johnson really wants to go back, but frankly, I just think that he understands that the only way he can get what he wants is if he either imposes a border or threatens to impose a border. And I feel that right now he's doing the latter in the hope that he doesn't have to do the former. He doesn't have to actually impose a border. So he's just threatening in the hope that the threat will be enough to bring people around to his way of thinking on this issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, threats have to have some sort of credibility. And
There
I
you
don't
go.
think his threats are credible now.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot will tell where Biden ends up first. His first external visit to this part of the world, whether it be to the UK or France or maybe even Germany.
Mm-hmm.
I think that'll be a major indication of where UK's relative strength vis-a-vis the European Union with America, where that's going to be. I do not suspect that Biden will prioritize the transatlantic relationship with the UK over the transatlantic relationship with the EU, but we'll see what happens there. All right. Any questions on this point, Ayo?
No, not yet. People are listening, but
Okay.
let's go ahead and ask the question. If you want to continue, do you want to continue with Britain, or should we go back to US?
Well, I have a follow-up question on because
okay,
also touched on the Caribbean, and so I guess a question I have on this point with reference to the Biden-Harris incoming presidency is what are the implications for the Caribbean beyond, say, Guyana? Because we're facing what has to be the greatest social and economic fallout, particularly with the impact on tourism that we've ever faced in our lifetimes in the Caribbean, right? This is a major event. Given Harris's in particular connection to the region, she's of Jamaican extraction, her father's Jamaican. And so the closeness there, and what are some of the implications you think there could be associated with the the incoming presidency of this Biden-Harris?
Yeah, I think they're pretty much none. If you set aside the United States relationship with Cuba and you set aside the issue with Guyana, and in many ways the two are related, I don't really see anything else coming out. The fact is that during the Cold War, Venezuela, yeah. During the Cold War, America needed us for one reason in particular, because we were part of their, one could say, their second line of defense. So they needed us for those reasons. So we had the Grenada invasion, we had the Enterprise of the Americas initiatives, we had the Caribbean Basin Initiative, and both of those were reflecting this ideological desire to have us on board. Since then, we haven't really had a reason to, you think of a president like Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton never had to offer the Caribbean anything because all of us were loving him. And the president since then, have had the same kind of issue. We weren't exactly loving the Bushes, but the problem is that we stuck with them notwithstanding. We have not made any demands on the Americans. We don't have any issues that we need to have resolved as such. So as a result, there will not be anything in it for us. And certainly during the Biden era, the Caribbean would have gotten, the United States would have gotten anything they want from the Caribbean. We were very happy to just go along with them in that way. And we never made any demands on the system either. So when it comes to the situation now, I am not really I'm not seeing anything in it particularly for us in that kind of way. There was a brief time where Trump flirted with Prime Minister Chastity, Prime Minister from Bahamas, and I think Jamaica Prime Minister as well, Holness, right? He flirted with them regarding investment that was supposed to be up in the air, but that was a way of getting them on board in terms of Venezuela, but nothing has come of that initiative to the best of my knowledge. So it brings us to Venezuela. I think that Biden will have the same interest in regime change in Venezuela as Trump has. I think that's probably one of the few things that they will agree on. I, however, think that Biden will pursue his interests more diplomatically than Trump would have. And then as far as Cuba is concerned, I'm minded that it's probably a lot of the reason that Biden did so badly in Cuba was because his
And
partner Obama started cozying up to the Cuban American population, and they're still not happy. You know, I'm fascinated to think that somebody who is not white could vote openly for a person who is he is a racist. But at the same time, for a lot of them, the issue was one of socialism, which they despise, and they are willing to set one over the other, and that's the reason why a lot of them got involved in it. So,
Even though the Democrats aren't socialist, but yeah.
well, yeah, I mean, it's just a label and a name. I mean,
Exactly.
you look at St. Vincent, where you have someone who says, "I'm socialist and I call myself a comrade." He doesn't care, but it's a difference between that and America. You know, I mean, when you call someone a socialist, and I mean, I'm in France now, and you call someone a socialist here, and they laugh because, I mean, the French brand, the European brand of socialism is acceptable. It's highly acceptable. And if you call someone a socialist, it's a compliment, you know. While in the United States of America, they sing a different tune with it. And sadly, because they could do with some good socialism, and certainly in their healthcare sector.
Sure.
Yeah. So I'm not seeing a lot of impact. I feel that, you know, life will continue pretty much as normal, but there will be a level of certainty and reliability that will return to foreign policy, and that we'll benefit from that.
Okay. Well, I noticed that our Prime Minister, when I say our Prime Minister, I mean Mia Moore-Motley.
Yeah.
It was very
quick. But your Prime Minister congratulated him too. So
our Prime Minister was very quick to reach out to congratulate Biden. Do you think that I know you're saying that you don't see any avenue for, well, any broader implication for the region beyond, say, Cuba, Venezuela, and Guyana, but can you see Barbados trying to, you know, because given that Mia is more very international facing, she's been out there on the international scene. Do you think that there's a possibility that we could make greater connection with this Biden-Harris presidency? Again, given our Prime Minister's propensity to go out there and be outreaching, and Harris's links to the region. I guess this is the same question again.
Yeah.
But we will capitalize on it instead of waiting for them to come first. Yeah.
It's an interesting idea. I think that the relationship between Kamala Harris and Jamaica is a little bit overstated. I mean, she has Jamaican roots. I mean, she knows the place and so on. But I don't really get the impression. I mean, certainly listen to her since that she's really in that close touch with her father. And I don't know whether that will have an impact on it. But the fact that she knows that the Caribbean exists is useful, because she probably knows a lot more about the regions existing than Pence. So that might be, you know, of some use to the fact that she actually knows the place. As to whether or not Prime Minister Motley will reach out, I believe she probably will, and I think that she probably will be successful in kind of a forging an alliance, because, you know, there's this gender thing and the feminists and female politicians, and I think that she can rally with Kamala Harris in that regard. So that is entirely possible. You know, once things get up and moving again, I think it's entirely possible. So they may have an alliance. As to what that alliance will produce, I'm not convinced that there will be anything much in it. But, you know, we may get a state visit in some stage, a Caribbean tour. We haven't had one for quite some time, so that may very well be useful to have that kind of a, you know, an association. Which could bear some fruit in the future. But whenever people say these things, I always say, but then what do we want from America? We want more tourists. You know, what we want visa-free access. What do we really want? Obama was African, and his I think was Kenyan?
Yeah, well, his father was
Kenyan, yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, him. You know, I'm not being politically incorrect, but right, the father. The same way they said that she's Indian and Jamaican, right? But yeah, I don't know that it changed the relationship between Kenya and the United States a whole lot anytime that he was president. because ultimately he's president of the United States of America and he has a domestic responsibility, which is first and foremost in his mind. So you may have friends, but I don't know if it changes anything. And especially since we are not in a situation where there is something that we want, that we can say we would like X or Y from the United States of America. Maybe we can cooperate with them in terms of the nominations that we have to make to major organizations. Maybe that might be something that we want. But I don't know about any other major ask that we have, you know, where we can get something in particular.
I guess what I'm thinking of is, and it comes immediate to mind. Obviously, it's, well, COVID, but beyond COVID, you know, the climate change policies. You know, region is going to be significantly impacted by the change in climate, right? The increase in temperature, and hopefully a reversal there. So that's what's immediately coming to mind. And the reason why I'm harping on this question is because, well, the Indians, well, the Indian government seems to be very excited about the prospect of having Kamala as vice president. And I know India is a much bigger territory. America's interests in India are going to be more substantial and important than their interests in the Caribbean, you would think. Well, yeah, given our geographic location, that could be debatable, but you would think so. So I'm just wondering, given their excitement at the prospect of Harris and their intent to maybe leverage the connection, whether we shouldn't be similarly, not really.
No, I don't think so. I mean, they are excited because there's an Indian in well, a heartbeat away from the White House, and I guess that's good that they should be proud of their own. So in the same way, you know, I think that we as Caribbean people would also be proud. But as to whether or not it would be any direct benefit, I'm not really convinced that there will be necessarily.
Okay, you're kind of pessimist.
Yeah.
Are you any questions from the audience or nothing yet?
Not yet.
But do you have any?
I just want to ask a question quickly, because I really want to talk about the U.S. election. I think that's topical right now. A lot of people still have some questions and so forth. It's being established that the concession speech is not legally necessary, but it has become a norm. And norms, I think, are just as important as laws to a country. One of the most powerful concession speeches that I remember, and possibly one of the most important, was the one that was done by John McCain after Obama's first entry into the White House, his first win as president. I think he was emotional and he was heartfelt, and he acknowledged the importance and the achievement of the moment to have a Black man in the White House. And I do think that it helped many Americans to transition to the Obama presidency. And so I still respect John McCain so much to this day because of the dignified nature of that speech some 12 years ago. And now we have Trump refusing to give a concession speech, refusing to even concede. Right now, I'm hearing that his wife is actually trying to encourage him. She's joined the list of people trying to encourage him to concede but he's not doing it because doing so requires him to acknowledge that he has lost. What are your thoughts on that?
No, it would be nice if he did, but I also don't know that he will. It's not really his style, you know. The thing with McCain's speech is that McCain's speech made me feel, I think it made Americans feel good. I think it made everyone feel good to know that you can have a person who is so diametrically opposed to you philosophically, but then that person can still congratulate you on the, you know, on a victory.
Acknowledge the historical moment of it.
Yeah. And I mean, and it was nice, but then I think that as time passed, we realized that McCain had something that Donald Trump lacked, and that McCain was a decent individual. And, you know, we got things out of him that you would never get out of Trump because Trump is not wired in that way. The other thing is that a concession speech from a sitting president is more important than a concession speech from someone like McCain who's never been president. So when you look at the concession speeches that are important, especially when a president fails to get a second term, and there have not been a lot of them. So there would have been a concession speech from Jimmy Carter. There would have been a concession speech from Bush the first. You know, those concession speeches are the ones that you have to look to see the similarity between what happened? No, because when your presidency is stopped in its tracks, it is important for healing that you are made to say, or that you say, you know, that you have conceded, that you realize that you have been beaten fair and square. But the challenge is that there are not a lot of historical precedents for him to follow. As I said, it's only been in recent times about 3 of them that haven't been able to make the second term. Because to not make a second term, you have to be pretty bad. I mean, and it is a sense, an admission that you've been a bad president. And Trump is not going to say those words. So I don't expect him to necessarily do it, but it would be nice to hear him utter those words, because it would help to bring closure for a lot of Americans who right now don't feel, you know, they don't feel that that is all over. They feel that there's something more to go. So that is it. And as I said, McCain's was nice, but then McCain was a decent individual. You know, we've had a few elections in the Caribbean where we haven't had concession speeches either. You know, a lot of people don't realize this, but when Denzel Douglas was beaten in St. Kitts in 2015, I think it was, he never conceded. He congratulated the incoming members of parliament, but he never said that, you know, he was beaten fair and square. He still hasn't said it, but he's out of office. And I think that the important thing is that he pack and he leave. But, you know, the extent to which he needs to say is, and, you know, I remember when Trump was campaigning and, you know, when they had the first thing about him grabbing the pussy. And, you know, I think that was the only time he ever really apologized. And he didn't really apologize. He said
it was
that
a half apology. It wasn't an apology.
It wasn't, right, that I'm not that person anymore, you know, not that this was wrong to say it. And if we look through his history, there's so many instances in which Trump has just not apologized for things which were unsavory and distasteful and whatnot. So if he doesn't do that, why would we expect him to and I say we, I'm using the word we, but I mean the Americans, why would they expect him to concede? Yeah.
A quick question before you continue, Terry. Is Roe versus Wade in jeopardy with Amy Supreme Court? What's her last name again? I always remember.
Amy Barrett. Yeah.
Barrett. Is it in jeopardy? Do you think that Joe Biden will be able to codify it, I suppose, with his win, especially to come out of being so passionate on the issue? And also, why are women's bodies politicized in the U.S. presidential elections? Is it simply to pander for evangelical votes? Louisiana and Colorado, for instance, they literally put abortion on their ballots. What are your thoughts on that? I know you are not
scary. Yeah. No, I mean, I'm not necessarily a woman, so I don't. I've never got her pregnant.
I was gonna say feminist, but okay.
But no, I am a feminist. I'm a feminist
for
sure. I associate very strongly with that. But yeah, it's unfortunate that it comes to that. But you know, the thing with evangelicals is that I have learned, and it's probably one of the reasons why I have very little use for Christians, that they are strange people. But the good thing with evangelicals is that it is a large group of people who have convinced people that they have moral authority. So as a result, their views and opinions are considered important in places that they should not, quite frankly. So the general feeling is that it is a good thing to believe in God. And people who believe in God are then able to say, well, let me bring along all of these things with them. And they have very simple requests. So they want, they haven't gone after gay marriage in the US, interestingly enough, because Trump, for some reason, that was one of the few issues that he wasn't really, he wasn't really interested in that. But they want to go after abortion. And like you, I don't quite understand why it is necessary to politicize women's bodies so. But the reason to me is very simple. It is something that evangelicals want, and it is easy to offer them. So you let them go ahead, you know, and the reality, the harsh reality of those kinds of laws is that they will really only ever affect people who are poor, because people who are wealthy and need abortions will get them. If they have to try or fly elsewhere, they will get them, precisely. But people who are poor, they will always be suffering with this. But evangelicals have this idea that, you know, they have this moral authority to carry this thing. They carried it to Trump. Trump could care less about whether somebody gets an abortion or not. But it's easy to say to an evangelical, are you going to bring me thousands of votes? If I say, yes, I'll give you a judge that will do this. And I think that that's the bargain, you know. But as to be him philosophically invested in it, I don't think so. So whether or not Roe versus Wade is safe, I personally think the challenge that Biden will have is that if he tries to pass legislation that achieves that objective, it may be more difficult for him to get it past Congress. While if he stands behind a position that the court has taken over the years, it is so much easier because you get it in that way. And you look at gay marriage, for example. You know, gay marriage was not the result of a particular initiative. It was a result of the fact that the court took a particular position. And it is a lot easier when you get to the promised land through the courts, because it is a lot less politically messy. And I think that for that reason, you know, the messiness of it is something that you can avoid by going the way of the courts. There are questions as to whether or not the Supreme Court will even be able to unmake Roe versus Wade, because there's a feeling that it has been an accepted position for such a long time. It may be hard for it to undo it. Apparently, there are some cases coming up that may give them the opportunity to speak to the issue, but there's really no guarantee. And there's also no guarantee that conservative justices will agree that they need to undo it. Because I think a woman's right over her body, I mean, it has to be one of the most sacrosanct things, you know? Mm-hmm. So that's where I am on it. But as you quite rightly said, I find it fascinating that we can have these issues coming to the fore where somebody who is a judge or somebody who is not involved in it, is it politicizing a woman's bodies and deciding that you are to decide whether or not she should have a medical termination of pregnancy. And in this regard, I'm always proud to say that, you know, Barbados is the only Caribbean country that in the 1980s went to Parliament and passed legislation to have medical termination of pregnancy. And up to this day, we have the most progressive legislation in the Caribbean on that matter. You know, and there's something about which I'm proud. So when people say to me now that they feel that the positions that the Prime Minister is taking regarding gays, regarding same-sex unions in Barbados, that is a bridge too far to cross. I would say that, you know, that party has a history of being revolutionary in these regards. So it is consistent with what they would have done in the Family Law Act. It's consistent with what they would have done regarding medical termination of pregnancy. It's consistent with what they would have done with unions other than marriage between people who were living in common law relationships. So I would say, well done. So that's how I'm seeing it. So I'm anxious to see whether the courts will take on these issues, whether they will take those kinds of positions. But it would be difficult, I feel, if Biden had to get legislation, as you say, to codify that position and to take it to get it through Congress with the level of marginality that he currently has.
In the Senate in particular.
Yeah.
Now go ahead, Terry, are you on? You good?
You can continue on this theme. I guess beyond Roe versus Wade, there's some other. So we have Obamacare that's possibly going to be on the chopping block for the court. Unlike you, Peter, I'm not so convinced that these religious zealots in the court, because they really are. I mean, America has a judicial system, and then they have their Supreme Court where we have partisans. Some individuals who are totally partisan, and they're perfectly prepared to reverse the position of the court. I suspect with this, they have now a 6-3 majority, conservative majority in the court. I mean, we only have like one conservative judge, Justice Kennedy, who's likely to be consistent in his positions. And be consistent in terms of not wanting to reverse his court's decisions in prior years. So I would suspect that he would be the one trying to safeguard, but he can now be outvoted with the other 5 religious right-wing judges who are perfectly prepared to overturn and reverse the decisions of this exact same Kennedy court vis-a-vis decisions pertaining to Roe versus Wade, decisions pertaining to gay marriage, decisions pertaining to a whole host of things. So I'm not so convinced. We have to wait and see how it actually materializes in the future, because these guys on the court are perfectly prepared to reverse themselves. Whether Amy will follow suit with them, I'm not so sure. But when I look at some of the other conservative judges, I am
You
fearful.
worry.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you can, let's pick this apart. The issue of healthcare.
Mhm.
I am less concerned about healthcare because I feel that there's a lot that Biden can do by way of executive action, by way of action at the level of presidency
Mhm.
that can help safeguard his objectives in relation to healthcare. So about those, I am less concerned. And the fact is that if you don't have a president in place that can put something else as an alternative to help deal with those issues, then well, deficiencies that are created, then, the likelihood that Congress will pull the rug in a situation, or I should say the courts will pull the rug in a situation where there's really no alternative to deal with it right now. I would be surprised if they take that position. The same-sex marriage thing, I don't really know if it is up for grabs, so to speak, because I remember some time ago they asked Trump about it and he said that he wasn't planning to try and get it reversed. Um, in a way, the abortion issue is easier to deal with legally than same-sex marriage because, like I always tell people, same-sex marriage in the United States is founded and based in their constitution, well, their independence, Declaration of Independence. It says all men are created equal. If you take a position that all men are created equal, it's hard for you to then, on top of that, argue all men are created equal if they're straight, but all men are not created if they're gay. All men are created equal regardless of race, but all men are not created equal regardless of sexual orientation. All men are created equal regardless of gender, because women and men have the same rights, but they're not created equal as a result of sexual orientation. That's a difficult argument to sustain legally for the most bigoted of geniuses. And I think that that's the reason why I think that that is probably safer. The abortion issue and right to life is a lot more sensitive legally because you're talking about the life of an individual, and we have different ideas about when an individual comes into being. And we also have different ideas about how an individual can have the life taken away. So America still executes people and whatnot, which here in Europe, as you know, Terry, that is an abomination, basically, in this part of the world, the idea of putting someone to death. But in America, it's popular, they don't hang them anymore, electrocute them, but they put people to death by lethal injection. So I think that that's going to be a bit more murky,
Mhm.
but the issue of healthcare and Obamacare, and also the issue of gay marriage, I feel that they are safer on safer grounds legally than the abortion thing. The abortion thing, I do worry about that happening. And there's just talk about religious freedoms and whatnot, and um, I don't really know that religious freedoms are under threat. And when I hear a lot of the Christian community concerned, I think that some of the concerns that they have raised is the fact that they don't believe that someone should be forced
Mhm.
to sell a cake to a gay couple, to make a cake for a gay couple. They have a problem with that. When that issue is really about it's not religious freedom at all because you didn't set up a business to sell to the church. You set up a business to sell to the public.
Right.
And again, I think that when you break that down legally, it's going to come back to the fact that the court has to say that, look, you can't discriminate against people in the public domain. So if you are opening a cake shop and you're selling cakes, you can't decide, I can sell cakes to people who can see but not people who blind. I can sell cakes to people who straight and not people who gay. I can sell cakes to black people and not white people. Once you start doing that, you're opening the doors for us to say, okay, what is an acceptable form of discrimination?
Mhm.
And that's something that America, I can't see America tolerating at any level. You got black justices, you got black justice on there. You have one that is she Chinese? She not Chinese, what is she? Or Korean?
I'm not.
Sotomayor,
Oh,
Sotomayor, what is she?
she's Latin American, if I'm
The
wrong.
Latin American, Latino?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you have that kind of mix, I would be very surprised if they would be willing to go down this road of saying what's the basis of racial. So I think religious freedoms, those are they're relatively safe, and I don't know that the court will be engaging in those issues. So my thing is, the issue for me in terms of the court that I'm worried about is the issue, the right to life,
Mhm.
and the Roe versus Wade.
Okay.
Mhm. But on the issue of, because I keep hearing people here in Barbados now, coming back home a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
talking about the government is instituting gay marriage, but is that even what's put on the table? I thought it was unions of same-sex unions, which is a legal precedent and not a religious one. So I'm a little bit confused, excuse me, about why the churches are marching up and down when nobody's asking them to perform ceremonies.
But they're marching, and they're preaching to people who don't really understand. And it's unfortunate that the questions that you're asking are not questions that are being asked of them. I mean, I listen to them every week, and they get a bully pulpit and they preach their brand of stuff. And no one challenges them. And that's the problem that I'm having, that nobody challenges them in relation to the reality.
Because it doesn't affect them.
Precisely. So they have convinced people. And I remember this nonsense started when Dennis Lowe was Minister of Community. And every single time Dennis Lowe opened his mouth, he talking about same-sex marriage. And Dennis Lowe started talking about people want to create an island and then force him to live on it. And to me, he threw down the gauntlet from then. And since then, people have built on this idea that if you have legislation that says that 2 men can get married or 2 women can get married, that it automatically means that everybody in the country is being forced to be gay, which is the most ludicrous thought, you know? And I've tried in terms of articles that I've written or whatnot to explain how it works. I mean, I got married in France. In France, they're very clear in their mind that marriage is a secular institution. You can do whatever you want after, and it's a blessing. And one of the things I like about the French system is that it sets a very clear bar. Whether you are straight, gay, black, white, Muslim, Hindu, Jew, you go to the church, the state office, and you get your marriage certificate, and your ceremony is performed by the deputy mayor in that environment. It can't be taken out of that environment. You can wear the same clothes you're wearing in terms of the church clothes, your wedding gown or whatever, and you can leave and you can go straight across the road to a church. There's several of them. You can go to a mosque, you can go to a temple, and you can have your ceremony, your marriage blessed by the church. Technically speaking, that's what happens in Barbados too, because what goes on in the church, right, where you go and you see them signing this marriage certificate, is that the state says, okay, the officers of the church are allowed to act as marriage officers, but they are essentially borrowing the church's, the state's authority to marry people. What you really do convey is a blessing. And I think in the Catholic Church, it's blessed people cars, it's blessed dogs and cats and all kinds of things. And ultimately, that's really what the church is doing. They are blessing the union of 2 people. And my thing is that if they don't want to bless it, then don't bless it. Nobody is asking them for anything. You know, and I've used myself as an example, and I said, you know, I'm married and I've never asked the church. I've not been anywhere near a church. And, you know, my position is, why would you not want to offer that? No, in that regard, Prime Minister Motley has made, in my opinion, she has made an extremely generous concession to the church. In that she's saying to the church, I will give civil unions, you can have marriage if the people of Barbados decide. So she has given them a referendum, which, I mean, I think that everybody figures that the referendum is going to fail. And as a result, they will have marriage that they can say, okay, this is ours, and we will only be able to give marriage to our people. But ultimately, anybody who is in a same-sex union can go and get a civil union certificate, which is similar to what Terry in United Kingdom, you can get it, you know. And the interesting thing with United Kingdom is that there are a lot of straight people that have said they don't want to be married and they prefer to have a civil union anyhow. And that's what they have gone for. In Barbados, you know, we don't have it. So there's a lot of mystery and misunderstanding. And it's sad that the pastors and priests are talking all this rubbish every week and not being challenged to tell the truth and challenge the
people.
Precisely, you know, into this thing that there's this I mean, so the guy yesterday, you know, he's talking about the fact that Barbados has been spared natural disasters recently, that they're having hurricanes in places like Jamaica and the other islands, but Barbados has been spared because people are so moral and so good, you know? I mean, it's the biggest load of rubbish I've ever heard. I did some statistics the other day, and I looked at the relationship between marriage and children. Okay? In Barbados, more children are born out of wedlock than in. And it's not only Barbados, because I did the analysis in Dominica, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, Grenada, Antigua, like all of them. more people are born out of wedlock than in. So if people are suggesting to me that there is this intricate relationship between marriage and having children, it's clearly something that I'm missing, because most people are having children out of wedlock. The reality is that we are not in the Caribbean and in Barbados, we're not big on marriage, period. Right? So I kind of understand why persons would say, and I mean, people have said to me, Peter, why would you need to get married? When the reality of the matter is that a lot of people who have, a lot of heterosexuals who have children and live what you call regular lives don't get married either, because it's not something that we in the Caribbean seem to be big on. So, you know, what's the big deal? I think it's a question of personal choice. You know, some people want to get married and some people don't. One of the good things about marriage is that it is easier for you to regulate property jointly when you're married. And that's probably one of the most practical ways about it. The other thing is that it makes movement and location and so on a lot easier where you're married, because you have right of access to citizenship, to residency, and those kinds of things. So I think what Prime Minister Motley is doing is creating a civil environment that allows persons who are same-sex to join and link themselves in an overt way, which I think is good and progressive. And, you know, the church got to understand, but sadly they have not been called to account and asked to say, you know, what exactly is the problem that you're having with this? And what's the basis of your objection? And then give them the opportunity to say what they're saying. And then someone says, you know, I did a call-in program once with Faith FM, right? In which I wanted to engage them on some of these fundamental issues. And the conversation went off on public health issues, relation to people having sex with one another, men having sex with men. It went off into morality and Sodom and Gomorrah and, you know, lightning bolts. And I'm saying, but how can you have a conversation with me about hellfire and brimstone when I don't believe in God? You know? It's as though you're saying you're forcing me to believe what you believe, and you're telling me about the Bible. And I'm saying, but the Bible is not my guide to morality. Goodness knows it's not my guide to morality, because then I will also have to believe in slavery. But anyhow, let's not get off on that hobby horse.
Yeah, but I take your issue on the whole assumption of morality because you're a Christian. But I mean, if we have so many issues, if we have this issue with morality and the soul of Barbados to steal Joe Biden's words. If we have this problem saving the soul of Barbados, I mean, you touched on it earlier. We have so many children out of wedlock right now. The past in the paper this morning saying that gay marriage is gonna be a threat to the population of Barbados. Population of Barbados was in jeopardy for quite some time. Right? So, just adding to what you were saying earlier about the whole morality argument, it's really a farce, and I do believe that these pastors know that they're misguiding their flock, because don't shoot me, but I honestly believe that a lot of them do it on purpose, and I do believe that they know that gay marriage is not on the table and it's really just gay unions, and they're unnecessary at this point. So that's just my take on that. Yeah.
But there's a political relevance to it. And I think that that's a big part of the problem, that it's politically relevant for the PDP and for other agencies to flog that horse. And it gives them something to believe in. It also gives the church a reason to stand up. And I think they have gotten life out of the fact that they have someone to fight with. So for those reasons, I feel that it is, you know, it is the way it is. But, you know, I always remember, not very well, because I was quite young at the time, when the Family Law Act was being promulgated and so on in Barbados. And there was a situation where people who were born out of wedlock were being treated the same as people who were born in wedlock. And the Family Law Act said, well, let's create a facility where people who live with each other for 5 years are treated the same as people who are living in. And then you remember, I don't know if you remember Prime Minister Motley, when she was Attorney General, she said, well, let's extend it further. And let's force men who father children after 5 years to continue to have that relationship with the children where the other fathers don't show up. And then people went through the roof, you know.
People are men.
Well, men,
Oh,
right? A lot of the men said that they had a problem
right.
with it, you know.
Yeah. And it had to
Um,
be withdrawn. Yeah.
yeah, that was a bridge too far to cross. But to me, it's all about regulating social behavior and ensuring that you do not create problems as a result of the fact that people do what they do, and then problems are created, and you have to step in legally and regulate them. And this whole thing about men abandoning children is a serious problem. And
Yeah.
I totally take Prime Minister Motley's perspective on the
Yeah.
issue.
The churches
You
should
know,
march on that.
yeah. But they're not going to, because they're feeling that they will step on toes. But I was saying, I remember the conversations that were created, and a lot of it to me was about a situation where people wanted to say, you know what, I'm better than you. You know,
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
I was born into a traditional, well, you could call it traditional family, and I always tell people that when I was growing up, my early years, because I attended a school where everyone else in my family, in my classroom, did not have a mother and father who lived together in a house. I thought that my family was not traditional, everybody else's was,
Mm.
because I thought the tradition was that people have one parent that they live with, or they live with an auntie or uncle or something like that. But
You
what
thought
we
you
had,
were the outlier.
right, with this white picket fence, and I had two dogs, and I had, you know, I mean, it was perfect, really. I
Oh,
thought it was abnormal, you know, because my mother and father lived together, and, you know,
I was
I
gonna
had a
say
sister and
that
a brother.
straight people don't get gay children, Peter. So I
Yeah,
don't know what
yeah,
you're
yeah.
talking about.
But
So
that's it. That was the twist. But so far, it was perfect. But I have never deluded myself that I was any better than anybody else, because I had two
mhm.
parents that lived together. And I always remember that I never deluded myself. My parents never encouraged me to think so. And I never really got that impression. But it was clear to me when I was listening to that debate, young as I was at the time, that there was a lot in it where people wanted to convey the impression that, you know what, if you have a so-called traditional family, you're better than somebody who doesn't. When the reality is that children don't choose a family. You know, you're born
Mhm.
into a situation, and it's not a situation of your own making. And I'm happy that we are at a stage in our development where we can start to tackle this whole issue of stigma, discrimination, and the way that we make people feel, you know.
Yeah.
And a child who goes to church and has a single parent should not feel any differently to a child who goes to church and has, you know, both parents living together. Um, it's just the way it is. And you know, the church has to deal with that. They have a sordid history of discrimination in that institution, and they have to deal with it frontally, you know. And people have to be willing to speak truth to power and to tell them, you know, where to get off.
Mhm.
So yeah,
I think I'll leave it
we
up
could
to
talk
the
about this all night.
Generation Z and the millennials. Yeah, so let's get back to politics a little bit.
Yeah.
Carrie, I'm just gonna ask a question and then
Mm,
we'll go into it some more,
mm,
right? All right, Peter, so let's talk a little bit about, because people like to watch this program and they say all the time because it's like educational at the same time,
mm,
and we try to explain politics and make it a little fun, right? A lot of pundits seem to agree that the incumbents in elections held during this pandemic
mm,
um, will be mostly successful, you know, since people can blame um, the virus for their personal economic
mm,
struggles and so forth. Jamaica, Bermuda, Trinidad, New Zealand, and as you would know, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, among others. The incumbents have all retained
mm,
the seat, the government, um, except where obviously there's a special political conditions, as in Bolivia
mm,
recently.
mm,
What special dynamics were at play
mm.
in the United States, and how crucial or how
Yeah.
critical was the incumbents' handling of the pandemic to the outcome of
Mm.
the election?
Yeah, I mean, interesting point. Is this a bit of clarity though that we need to establish first? We had
Mm-hmm.
election in Suriname under COVID. We had
Mm-hmm.
election in Anguilla under COVID. We had an election in Guyana under COVID, and governments changed in all of those instances.
Yeah,
There's
but
a
they were
presumption.
early.
They're early in
Yeah.
the yeah, they were early in the debacle. Although yeah, they were early in the debacle, but
Mm-hmm.
nonetheless, I mean, there were still COVID elections, and
Yeah.
um, the presumption that governments will change or will not change is something I said we had to be very careful with, because what happened in the United States happened in three other places during COVID. At the same time, however, I get you that the more recent elections that we have had, it appeared as though they were all going in one direction. One of the things that in the political consulting world we accept is that natural disasters tend to help the incumbent, right? And the case in point you can usually give is that election that we had when Arthur came into office in 1984, I believe it was. And he had a by-election before the flood, and he lost. And then they had the flood, and he had the by-election after the flood, and he won. Generally speaking, there's a flood that took. It wasn't Karoo, no, it was long before that. Yeah, it was long before 84? That. Yeah, they had a flood. They had a flood in 84. Yeah. But there was a flood between and after, and I always remember there was a really cute cartoon in the newspaper where someone asked Owen whether he thought it was because of the flood that he won, and he said Noah. Okay. So
Noah.
He said Noah. Yeah, he said Noah.
I was a little bit slow on the uptake.
Yeah, but you're not good on your biblical thing. That's the problem.
That's the problem.
You used to say to Sunday school, then you would remember. But yeah, so that generally speaking is how it goes. And natural disasters tend to help the incumbent. I remember going into a very hostile area for the LP in Dominica, Labour Party, is in the Roseau Valley, and it was one of the more hostile areas of the valley, speaking to some people who are generally speaking not supporters of the Labour Party. And I asked them about their reaction in the immediate aftermath of Hurricane Maria. And they were very clear in telling me that if they had an election a few days after Maria, they would have supported the government, because they said that regardless of their political complexion, the member of parliament came, they had food, they had water, they had everything that they needed to sustain themselves. They had tarpaulin for their houses, they had all of the necessary things. And the reason for that is really quite simple, that in the aftermath of a natural disaster, the things that people need are very simple. They need food, they need shelter, they need clothing, they need security. And in most instances, you can descend with a vehicle, a Land Rover, and bring, a few cases of water, cook some soup and distribute it. And people would appreciate that, because they say, you take care of them. You give them 6 months after that, or a year, when the house still break down and they're still living under tarpaulin, they're singing a different tune. And they're saying, but I living like this for so long, I ain't got a job or whatnot, what more you can give me? So the proximity to a natural disaster is always practical from a political perspective, because it always helps. And I think in the case of COVID, it's a neater natural disaster in that you don't really have buildings blowing away and whatnot. You just have a whole lot of people out of work. The challenge, however, is that it's untidy in the sense, it's neat in that sense that you don't have anybody house blowing down, but it's also untidy in the sense that you don't know when it will end. So for that reason, everyone was bringing up their elections because they want to have the election now where they can say to people, all right, let me give you a little bit of assistance. And you'd remember in Barbados during the lockdown, we had an agency that was driving around and making sure that people had food and whatnot, and they're very happy. The challenge is that 6 months later, a lot of people are still out of work and they're beginning to complain and get antsy and whatnot. So in short, the reaction that you're seeing is, generally speaking, a reaction to natural disasters. Natural disasters generally help incumbents, and I think that this is essentially proving that incumbents are running. In situations where a natural disaster is badly handled, however, it can be devastating for incumbents, and I think that that's what we're seeing with Donald Trump, that he's losing it because it was a referendum or how badly that he handled the issue. And I will go further and say that in the case of Trinidad and Tobago, a big part of the reason why the PNM started hemorrhaging support just as the election was coming was because people started to realize that they didn't handle it that well either. And that was a big part of when the number of cases started to climb and whatnot. People said, look, and that's the reason why I think that coming on to the end, they hemorrhage considerable support.
Yeah.
So that's my
So
sense
excited.
of it. And I would say to any person who has an election, do call it no and get it out of the way, because you will do better now than you will in a year's time when the cruise ships still haven't returned and whatnot.
Mm-hmm. We got a couple of comments that I want to read quickly from the audience.
Mm-hmm.
Nikki's saying that marriage does not belong to the church, to the Christian church, neither does the church set the criterion for the rest of the world as far as the metaphysical or ethical outlook the individual is concerned. And she goes on to say that, and to the point, with children born out of wedlock, the Christian church cannot therefore then attribute the destruction of the sanctity of the traditionalist nuclear family unit to the gay civil union.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And I agree with
Agreed. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
yeah. And Thad is asking, Thad is bringing us back to Barbados. Thad is tired of hearing about the US. Thad is asking the question. That's not what he said. I'm saying that for him, yeah. Thad wants to know point blank, what does it mean? What would it mean for the Barbados Labour Party if Refer won the by-election?
No, I mean it would mean that history has been made. We've had several by-elections since independence. There really only has been one of them in which a seat has changed hands, and there was a by-election in 1976, right before the Democratic Labour Party was ushered out of office. A gentleman called Maxwell, who I believe was the Speaker of the House, he did something, and he was declared bankrupt, so he had to resign from Parliament. There was a by-election, and David Simmons beat him in St. Philip, which is a DLP stronghold. That signaled that the Democratic Labour Party was on its way out. So the 1976 election was when the Democratic Labour Party was completely washed out, and David Simmons maintained that seat, which he subsequently lost in, I believe it would have been 1976, 81, yeah, in 81. But that's the only by-election in which the incumbent or the party that was holding the seat lost it. So all of the other ones that we have had over the years, they have been consistent with the election before and after. And I mean, that analysis is fairly clear to me. So I would say that if Refer won this election, it would mean that the Barbados Labour Party has lost considerable support, and in a relatively short space of time. That is hard for me to see how that can happen, but certainly if it did, it would mean that Prime Minister Motley would need to summon her lieutenants to her side and to try and understand what exactly is going on in Barbados, that she could lose 70-something% support overnight, because it would be a serious indicator that all is not well. And that is not a sense that I get on the ground, because I don't really get a sense on the ground that people believe that she has performed so badly over the time that she's there. Indeed, I think that by and large, people feel that, you know, the leadership was at least acceptable, if not, you know, more so than that. As to whether or not he would become opposition leader, that would be an interesting question, because personally, I think that the moral authority in terms of the opposition is really with the Democratic Labour Party. So if he did get into Parliament, in my opinion, he should become leader of the opposition. Legally speaking, however, he cannot, because the opposition leader has already been chosen. And the only way you can get a different person there is if he either resigns, or alternatively, you find more than one person says that he should lead. The rule is that the person that gets him, the person who can command the second most support in Parliament, becomes opposition leader. So it's easy to say, okay, I command the support of myself, so I should become opposition leader. In a situation where the Governor General is unsure which of the two people commands the majority support, she is supposed to defer to the status quo. That's the way the Westminster system works. And the status quo would more or less require that the current opposition leader continues until such time as a second or third person comes and says, okay, we want him to be removed. But personally, I think that if Rifa were able to get into Parliament, he should be opposition leader, because he commands more, certainly more support in terms of the national population than this other guy.
I want to pick up on that same question from Thad and just share some information here.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah.
So So we have here the historical performance in the St. George North constituency going back to 34 years, right? And so given your response to Thad's question that, you don't think he could get in, right? What would represent success? Because we have, like, in the last election, Barbados Party went 81% relative to 13%. The election prior to that, 59 to 41, and so on. I think the Democratic Party performed best in 1986 when they actually took the 60% of the vote, right? What would, given that they're probably not going to win, what would represent success for the Democratic Party? And yeah.
I like that question, Terry, and I like the fact that you presented the data as well, because that's the kind of research position that I would like to come to. It's a question that's been coming up a lot, and I wonder whether a return to, I would say a return to the 2013 strength of the Democratic Labour Party should be the objective that they will look to. So if the DLP can return to 41%, and the Barbados Labour Party can be taken back to 59%, I would say that if you consider the fact that the DLP won the election in 2013, that would be a good marker that we can use to gauge support. If it is that the Barbados Labour Party was reduced to the support it had in St. George North in 2013 when it was out of government, I would say that that sends a signal that people are less happy than not. And for the Democratic Labour Party, I think that 40% needs to be their objective. The problem that the DLP is going to have in getting to 40% is that there's 6 people running. And the opposition support in 2013 was undivided. It was basically just the Democratic Labour Party. The opposition support now is broken up into 5 or 6 different parties. So this idea that these smaller parties are to be encouraged, a lot of people don't realize that the only person that is hurting as a result of these small parties is the Democratic Labour Party.
Opposition.
So I can say that about the DLP 40%. Safe in the knowledge that the DLP will probably not get to 40% because the Democratic Labour Party right now is at 13%. And it will be hard for them to get to 40% because they're competing with 3 or 4 other people. People who support the Barbados Labour Party will want nothing to do with them. But they are struggling to get the opposition support. And I think that what they need to do is consolidate it precisely. The other thing about the data that's interesting, though, is that the St. George North was a bellwether in that it reflected what was happening in the national conversation. So at times it was lost. It was because the country was lost. That was the case up until 2008. When 2008, the country went towards the Democratic Labour Party, but St. George North stayed. And my sense is that that's when you really saw the MP coming into his own as an MP. And it was really reflecting a more Barbados Labour Party type constituency to the point now where it's the 5th strongest constituency in the island. St. Michael Northeast is the Prime Minister's constituency. And I don't know how many people remember, but in 1991, Mia Motley was beaten in St. Michael Northeast, right? And she was beaten by a guy who, I mean, he was a nice person or whatnot, but he wasn't even a minister. He was a political lightweight. And a political heavyweight like Mia Motley could not defeat him in St. Michael Northeast. You fast forward 25 years, and she's unstoppable. I mean, she got the highest level of support that any member of parliament has ever gotten in a constituency anywhere in the Barbados. More than Al Barrow, more than Tom Adams, more than any of them. Historically, the highest performance in the general election was hers in the last election in 2018, right? So I think that a similar, not a similar, but a similar dynamic, a dynamic that is less extreme has occurred in St. George North, in which the representation with the Barbados Labour Party has grown exponentially to the point now where it appears to have an unassailable lead. So if in that environment, the DLP can get 40%, I would say that Reefer should be quite proud of himself.
And so denying the Democratic Party that 40%, so long as the Barbados Party is able to do that, they can count that as
I feel so, yeah. They can say it's a moral triumph. And you know the good thing with them, once they win, they can always say it's a moral triumph. Because
a win is a win.
the mistake that Verla de Pisa made is when she said this is a referendum on the government.
Mm-hmm.
If it's a referendum on the government and the government win, then clearly the government is doing well. You know, they can always explain away a margin, but the reality is that they will probably win, and that is hard to argue it. You know, they say the win is a win.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, most people don't remember these percentages unless they're brought back to their attention, right?
Mm. But yeah, I mean, when you spread it out here and you have all of the polling divisions, and the worst performing polling division gets 73%. I mean, that's rough, you know. 73% is safe seat territory, and as you said, 73 and 74 is G1 and GF1. G1 and GF1, yeah, those are the two weakest.
Right.
And if your weakest box is 73%, you sit in good, you know. And I think a little needs to be said also about Tony Moore, you know, because I think that Tony Moore is an asset to the Barbados Labour Party for a couple of reasons, not least of which is the fact that she is the head of the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. I remember the Barbados Workers Union the Barbados Workers Union gave birth to the Barbados Labour Party. So the history is as deep as that. And the fact that Walcott left the BLP because he was uncomfortable and went and sat with the Democratic Labour Party. And Trotty and Bobby Morris and all of them left, and they were comfortable with the Democratic Labour Party. The BLP is now comfortable again with the Barbados Workers Union is comfortable again with the BLP. So in a sense, it has come back home. And, you know, I mean, Trotty on a Barbados Labour Party platform, you know, is unstoppable. Mm-hmm. And then Tony Moore is a woman, first woman to become General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. You know, she's sitting in Parliament. You know, that meeting that they had in St. George North last week with an all-female platform, you get a signal that sends if you are a feminist like me. It sends a signal that women have really arrived in Barbados. And I would say to the Democratic Labour Party, you know, what you should do is you should mount a female platform. You know, with all the Irene Sandifer Garner and Maisie Barker Welch, I don't know if she's still able to speak on a platform, but bring out all of your women, you know, Maxine McLean, and bring out all of your women, Esther Bayesuku, and you have a ladies meeting. Right, have a ladies meeting and prove that you can do it. And the reality as a situation is hard to, because the firepower that the Barbados Labour Party has, the pink power that the Barbados Labour Party has, is pretty awesome. You know, it really is pretty awesome. I would be intimidated.
Oh, you just said Terry everything that I tell him every day. But yes.
Yeah.
So I'm just here smiling, right? But yeah.
Listen,
and it's funny because sorry.
Go ahead.
Funny because when the platform was going on, I was listening. I was, you know, I'm between each video, you know, that is showing, and Irene Sandifer Garner, I found it strange that she was on the Democratic Party at the point in time and trying to, okay, so if this is obviously a good thing. You understand? It's difficult to say something bad about it. You understand what I'm saying? An all-woman platform, political platform. So it's difficult to say something bad about it. And I just found it a little strange that she was literally trying to say, I would have stayed from it and just dealt with what it is that I come to talk about. Basically, I would have stayed away from it on that issue. But yeah,
I would have advised her to stay away from it too. And I was saying to you earlier that, you know, I was always impressed when from the time when Tom Adams put Billy Miller in the cabinet. She became first cabinet minister. And then I remember in 1994 when Arthur took Billy Miller and Mia Motley and Liz Thompson. And Liz and Mia were two very junior people. And she gave one health, he gave one education. And I mean, I think to myself, all this power and all this money. And he has essentially divided up the kingdom among three women. And it was a serious signal that it sent. You know, a serious signal of commitment to creating this level of gender balance and so on. And I mean, there's no way there's no way, I mean, as much as Arthur became hostile to Mia Motley, there's no way that you can talk about the enfranchisement of women in Barbados in politics without mentioning Tom Adams for taking the step to put Billy Miller in cabinet, and then mention Owen Arthur for taking the step for creating the Powerpuff Girls as they became known. I actually thought it was Powder Puff, but I realized after, because I'm not into cartoons and stuff.
Like, you have children, so you wouldn't know.
I did that precisely right. So it's a powerful signal, and the Democratic Labour Party to me has not dealt with it well. I felt that the DLP could have dealt with gender in a way that was more sensitive. You remember, I don't know, well, you wouldn't remember this because you would be too young to remember, but Carmita Fraser was a politician, a DLP politician. And they sent Carmita to run against Henry Ford, you know. Henry Ford was the most successful Minister of Women's Affairs that Barbados has ever had, because when I was talking about all of this legislation with Family Law Act and medical termination of pregnancy, Henry Ford was the Attorney General. So he was the Attorney General and he was Minister of Women's Affairs. And that was a boss strategy, because Tom Adams took Henry Ford, gave him Minister of Women's Affairs, and he had a woman in the cabinet and he gave her the Ministry of Health, which was interesting because normally you would have gender or women's affairs being right to give him a little soft ministry, you know, or whatnot. But he took Billy and gave her health, and then he took Henry Ford and he made him Minister of Women's Affairs. And Henry Ford was, they said he was easily the most successful Minister of Women's Affairs, and he wasn't a woman. And then the Barbados Democratic Labour Party sent what was supposed to be a progressive woman, which is Carmita Fraser, to run against Henry Ford in the seat that they absolutely knew that she would be beaten in, you know? And they have not treated women in a progressive way. When they had the vacancy in St. John, yes, they put a woman in it, but they put a woman in it because she was David's wife. Verla de Pisa, to me, has not been treated well by the Democratic Labour Party, because there were opportunities for Verla to have run in seats that were winnable, and she was never offered that opportunity. And that's why I'm fascinated now that she would not take the most attractive pick, which would be St. John and the Democratic Labour Party. You know, she's talking about going to St. Lucie and whatnot, which to me is foolishness, because she's going out there to get beat. So the DLP has an uncomfortable relationship with gender and their women, and they need to address it sooner rather than later, because they're being overtaken, you know. You're gonna have a vice president, a female vice president just now, you know, and you can have a decent front line of women in the Democratic Labour Party. It's a problem.
A quick question. You want to go, Terry, or you can read these audience?
Go ahead.
So just some questions from the audience and comments. Okay, somebody's saying, I'm surprised I haven't seen any polling for the by-election. That's probably because Peter isn't here.
Well, I can answer that one quite easily, because I've been polling all of those elections we talked about in polling for St. Kitts, Trinidad, Jamaica, all of them. And I was right here in France. You wouldn't normally poll an election in a situation where there's no doubt about your being able to win it. Perhaps the media could poll it, but the media hasn't been doing any polls recently. And I think that's why you haven't seen any, because it's not really in the interest of either political party to poll it. If the DLP polls it, they have evidence that they're going to be beaten. If the BLP polls it, essentially they know what they know already. So that's why. And really, there's no surprise in store. Yeah.
They're just wasting money.
Yeah.
So Todd is asking, hope I'm pronouncing that right, Todd.
This your brother? Todd is your brother, Terry?
It's probably
a different Todd. Okay. I didn't know he was so political. That's refreshing.
Oh, that's him? Okay. What are your thoughts on how the DLP treated their elected general secretary?
Yeah, this is Kimar. No, I had written about it, and I spoke about it on the radio too, and I thought it was unfortunate. I don't get this ganja thing. I don't get the concern that the state should have with somebody smoking a spliff. I thought the position that the government has been taking in terms of decriminalizing it, to me, is too conservative. I feel it should go further. My thing is that in the same way that I could go and buy a bottle of rum and drink it and get blind drunk, I believe that a person that has an interest in smoking ganja should be able to do so. I'm fortunate that I don't, so I guess it's easy for me to say that because I know the police ain't gonna come finding ganja in my house. But the harsh reality in Barbados and the rest of the Caribbean, for all intents and purposes, is that these prohibitions against the use of ganja come down on a particular social sector. You don't find them rich boys and then white boys that smoking ganja. You don't find them before the courts. But what you find before the courts all the time is a set of poor boys that have to smoke on the block. And that's the concern I have. And I think it is unfortunate that it has wrecked so many reputations. And, you know, if you have a criminal record, you can't be a lawyer, you can't be an accountant, you can't be so many things if you have a criminal record. You can't get a visa, you know. And for what? It's silly. So I think that the DLP has handled that situation with Kimar Stewart very badly. I don't know whether he's innocent or guilty, and I guess in due course he will either be exonerated or he will be convicted. But one way or the other, I don't really believe that he did anything wrong. If he smoked it, he ain't doing nothing wrong. If he didn't smoke it, I don't think he did anything wrong. And it's for that reason that I felt the Democratic Labour Party abandoned him. The Prime Minister was right when she said that if you know that someone who is running for you politically is exposing themselves, it is in your interest to say to them, buddy, hold back a little bit. Let's deal with this situation first, and then let's go forward after. Because it's not about me. I don't have a problem with it, but you know how society is, so maybe it's not a good idea. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is that if you decide, look, he has this matter pending, we're going forward, then we're going forward brave. And if it is that he's charged, you can't abandon the boy by suspending him. Because if you are convinced either that he's innocent or alternatively that what he's guilty of is nothing bad, then you should stand behind him and say you can continue to be General Secretary. And I think it's unfortunate. I feel that the youngster is, I think he has promise. I have a soft spot for him. He ran in my constituency, yeah. He ran against me, yeah. You know, and he's a nice guy. Yeah, he got a vote. He got a big set of votes because nobody will vote for him, but I admire the fact that he walked about the heat canvas and whatnot. He takes this thing seriously. So he is a young man with promise, and I feel the DLP needs people like that. And I think it's unfortunate that they have suspended him because what they have done is held the boy up to public ridicule. No, you know. And I don't believe that the vast majority of us really think that he did anything wrong. I was saying the other day that George Bush II is the only president that has ever run with a criminal conviction. George Bush II had a driving under the influence conviction back in the day, where he was pulled over and he was driving under the influence. But George Bush has always led with that information because one of the first things he's always said is that he had this thing, this DIY in Texas back in the day, and it has not affected him politically. You know, and I believe that we are at the stage now where in Barbados, I remember Obama said he smoked, things that he smoked and didn't inhale. I don't think that Hillary Clinton smoked ganja. Right, he didn't inhale. I don't think Hillary Clinton smoked ganja. That was not her thing. But I think that we are ready now to know that we have a person in politics who is unashamed about saying, yeah, I smoke ganja, you know, so what? Like Natalie, so what?
And especially as we are on the cusp of really, sorry, I heard you late. We're on the cusp of basically legalizing small quantities of marijuana.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Terry.
Yeah, how with it? Yeah.
No, I was gonna ask. Well, I think I know the answer to this already. But should the government, therefore, as we move towards maybe legalizing possession and use of small quantities or quantity of ganja, should the records of those individuals whose lives have really been impacted upon, and like you, I share the same sentiments with regards to particularly young males who have been negatively impacted upon by the judicial system that we have, prosecuting them for possession and use of small quantities of this drug. Should those records be expunged?
I think that it has already, you know. I believe that they have already taken action to expunge those records. So to the best of my knowledge, either it has been done or it will be done shortly. But that's part of the thing, because in all of the other islands where they have changed the legislation, that's the first thing that they have done. They have expunged your records. I am not a huge fan of the road that we are going with the idea of giving people tickets. What I like is the Antigua approach, where everybody can get these tree plants.
Yeah.
Yeah, so everybody can grow the tree plants and everybody can have, you know. So I have a basil plant right outside my window here in France. And whenever I need basil, we don't do ganja thing.
Right.
Whenever we need basil, we just pick a leaf and we, you know, I think that that's the way that the whole ganja thing ought to go, to the point where people have the tree plants and, you know, you smoke a spliff, you dry it and you roll it, because it doesn't have production in it. It's not sophisticated production, you know. And I think that will be one of the things that will do, is that it will kill the criminal element associated with the consumption of marijuana. I'd done a study some years ago in which I determined that a lot of the violence associated with the ganja industry was associated with procurement. It wasn't really associated with people smoking and going crazy and whatnot. It was really associated with the method of procurement. I think the Antigua issue has solved that procurement issue, where it says, you know, if you can grow your own, and then you don't really have a procurement problem, you know. Yeah. The problem, of course, is that it will also mean then that people who are involved in that business for a living will no longer make a living doing it. Because smuggling in Antigua now has killed that industry altogether. So nobody bought to import ganja because you can grow your own, you know. So
yeah, maybe we can work on our food security and imply those
competition
farmers differently. Sean Knight is asking a question. He said that last week's guest, I don't think it was last week's guest, if I remember correctly, I think it was probably Tennessee. He said last week's guest made the point that the Prime Minister should not have called the by-election so early in her first term. Interested to hear Peter's take on that, like what he's asking.
I don't see why not. I mean, she is halfway. She's doing a reassessment and is at this point that she needs to determine whether she wants to go forward. My expectation, this is going to be one of others. I think there are probably a couple others that will be coming, and halfway point is a good time to do a reassessment. And if you look at what's happened recently, it's been a full reassessment, in that she had a throne speech. You know, she made changes to the cabinet, and I think that this is the time to do it. So I've heard this argument about so early in the term, and I don't necessarily know. A political term has 4 years. That's the way that it should always go. It should have 4 years. And once you turn the corner of your 4th year, you look for the most convenient point to have a general election. And so everything that you need to accomplish within the first 4 years. And she seems to have set herself that task. So we are basically at the halfway point in terms of the 2-year point. And I think that she's now looking down the road to you know, and to be quite honest, she's working hard. You know, she's working harder in this by-election than I personally think that she needs to. You know, but I mean, they have meetings and they're putting a lot of energy into this thing, so they're obviously taking it seriously.
A lot of work, a lot of meetings, a lot of canvassing. You can't drive through. I have to drive through St. George to get home. Well, not have to, but I take that road at the shortcut sometimes to avoid traffic. And I'm always seeing red shirts, and it's like a full election campaign going on in St. George.
No,
it's absolutely crazy to me, the amount of effort that's going into it, but they're doing what they do.
We ain't got 80% of the support.
What about the argument, though, that, you know, the appearance of Anthony Wood on the LP platform, and you know, that these things should be happening in a general election and not so early in the term?
Well, I mean, Anthony Wood has a problem in that I think that Anthony Wood has essentially used up a lot of his political energy unnecessarily in pursuit of an objective that can't be achieved. Because one of the good things for the BLP is that if they win this race, they will also silence the Anthony Woods. You know, and so I think that he played his cards wrong, because it was for him to decide whether he wanted to wait and come out in a general election, when that kind of talk could have been a lot more effective. But he's played his cards wrong, and that he's come out early, and a win in that constituency will also be a moral victory against the Anthony Woods factors as well. So yeah, I mean, it's strategy.
Right.
You know, they play the wrong strategy and they get well, caught.
You know, I'm always confused sometimes, like what people think is gonna be helpful with the electorate. I don't think we give our electorate enough credit, and people tell me sometimes that I overestimate people, but I don't think that I overestimate. But I don't think that people really care about what he's saying.
I don't think so either.
I mean, he's literally talking about a squabble that he's having with somebody. I can't see how you're gonna care that somebody's having a squabble.
No, and I tell you,
you're going to deal with issues.
Yeah, and I tell you, if you knew the real reason that he was having the issue, you would be even less concerned. And the problem, I think, is that a lot of people know the real root of this matter, and they understand that it's more personal than you could ever imagine. So I don't think that people really see that as being anything fundamental. I remember when Don Blackman crossed the floor in 1986, and Don Blackman spoke about fundamental philosophical issues he was having with the Barbados Labour Party. He caught people's attention because we saw something fundamental and philosophical. He crossed the floor. When Richie Haynes left the Barbados Labour Party, the Democratic Labour Party, Richie Haynes started the NDP. Richie Haynes was essentially presenting a liberal agenda in terms of economics, a liberal economic agenda. And he was arguing that Sandyford could not sustain it and that he could. And he put a lot of effort into building the NDP and whatnot. What we have now in terms of Anthony Wood and Reverend Adderley is people who are opportunists that are looking for opportunities to make a play for themselves. I mean, I think that we understand why Adderley is over there. And in the case of Anthony Wood, he's obviously seeking an opportunity that he was not able to capitalize on. And now he's essentially making a villain out of the Indarware. But there's no Richie Haynes in there. There's no Don Blackman in there. And I mean, those are the two people. I mean, you guys may be a little young to remember. But when I think about an alternative direction, those are the people that I hold up. We had a crossing of the floor in St. Kitts and Nevis recently where the former finance minister fell out with Denzel Douglas. He crossed the floor and he's now leading the opposition of, well, basically that has become the government. Those things are fundamental, you know, and then when you listen to them, they're fundamental issues that they raise and brought to the table. But I don't really hear anything fundamental in what Anthony Wood is talking, and definitely not fundamental in what what's his name, Bishop Adderley is talking. You know.
I know there's a saying that sometimes when you want to destroy somebody, you have to destroy yourself in the effort. So you should be careful of that. But anyway, Peter, one of the things we get him done, and we finish up in another. Yeah. We finishing up soon than I thought.
5 minutes.
I want to talk about 5 minutes. You're watching the time. So I want to talk. But I still have 6 minutes. Anyway, I want to talk a little bit about St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I know that you wrote an article recently about the 5-star general. Very well put article. Prime Minister Gonzalez has retained power. You predicted this in your poll. But this is his 5th term. What are your thoughts on term limits? I know you discussed it in the article, but like I said, you know, this is the show. What are your terms of term limits? Their efficacy, if any, to democracy, and also what are the special circumstances in St. Vincent and the Grenadines that continues to re-elect the comrade? Yeah.
No, well, I support term limits. I've always supported term limits. I think that leaders should have 2 terms, not even 3. So for me, that's an easy question to answer. And I have had conversations with Dr. Gonzalez about term limits. And I'm pretty sure that at some point in time, he told me that he supports them too. So it is...
How many terms? 5 terms?
Well, no, I mean 2 or 3. I think he probably was at 3. The challenge is, how do you get to a situation where you change the laws to allow for it? In Barbados, it's quite easy because you can change the constitution overnight. And if Prime Minister Motley is committed to term limits, she can go to Parliament and do it tomorrow. In the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it's a lot more difficult. The last occasion in which they tried to change the constitution, to achieve other objectives that when included, they were rebuffed and basically they failed in the referendum. We had a referendum in Grenada where a single question as to whether or not a 3-term limit should be imposed on the Prime Minister was included in the referendum at the urging of the NGO community, and that was also rebuffed because the opposition campaigned against it, and it was also rebuffed. So you basically have a problem where once you need a referendum, you're not going to get support to be able to make any of those kinds of fundamental changes, and therein lies the problem. As far as Ralph Gonzalez is concerned, you know, my thing is that I think it would be better for St. Vincent to have term limits, but as long as he's not breaking any law, what can you do? And a lot of people are attacking him for staying in power so long, when the reality is that he was elected each and every time, you know? And that's the thing. I mean, he has support within the party. And if you look at Ralph Gonzalez's tenure, and I compare him with Denzel Douglas in St. Kitts and Nevis, and Denzel Douglas had issues internally after his 3rd term, right? Oinata had internal issues in his 3rd term. You know, Barra had internal issues in his 3rd term. And when I was talking about the 76 scenario, a lot of that issue with Maxwell and whatnot represented internal issues. So the idea of a person, there's a Prime Minister Gonzalez, Dr. Gonzalez has never had any of those internal issues. There's a level of cohesion in the Unity Labour Party that is unprecedented, that I don't see in many political parties that are five terms old. So he's obviously been able to manage it. And I mean, if you look at the way that he has members from time to time who get a little uppity, you know, and he has an interesting way of dealing with them to the point where everybody is cool and settled and whatnot, you know. And I remember when Timothy Harris was having issues with Denzel Douglas and all the rank and the argument and whatnot, and Denzel Douglas eventually fired him from the cabinet. And that was basically the beginning of the end of Denzel Douglas, right? And if there's one thing that I can say, and I'm willing to say it publicly, you know, that my advice to Denzel Douglas at the time was, do not fire the man, because you will only create problems for yourself. So basically, if you want to know what is Gonzalez's recipe is basically to ensure that he has the highest level of cohesion within that party, however possible. If it means that you have to spend copious amounts of time dealing with members that have issues and problems, so be it. So he's been a good Prime Minister. I mean, there's no question about it. He's been a good Prime Minister developmentally. The number of children that he has sent to the University of West Indies, young people, he's increased that exponentially in several years because he has a strong commitment to education. He's built and delivered an international airport. He's on the cusp of delivering several major hotels to St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which will create short and long-term employment. And then there's some other infrastructure that he's created and so on. But when you add that to the fact that he has this philosophical thing which has essentially rooted the country in this socialist development in which everyone can share, you have a winning formula, and that's the winning part of it. So what I would say to you and to others who have concerns about him being around for so long, I have similar concerns because I do not believe a person should be Prime Minister for that long. But I have several clients who have stuck around for longer than 2 terms, and I continue to work with them. And my thing is that it's not a situation where I can decide or anybody can decide unilaterally that we want to remove. Once the constitution of a country permits a person to run indefinitely and the people are continuing to vote for them, so be it. Because remember, in most instances, and not in most instances, in all instances, you are more likely to get 2 terms, the first and the second term. You win the first term, most people will give you a second term unless you're a horrible leader. If you look at the number of one-term governments we had in the Caribbean, there's not many. Most of them will get 2 terms. Once you get 2 terms, after that, it is usually the opposition that keeps you in power. And in the case of St. Kitts, in the case of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, it's the opposition that have them there because the opposition has been poor. This time around, I would say, COVID is probably a big part of the reason why he won this election, because the narrative from the opposition was about change. People are uncomfortable with change in this environment. So I feel that COVID has helped him in this time. But all of the other elections, it was Arne Eustace, you know, that got him in. And it was the same thing with St. Kitts. Denzel Douglas continued to win because the other party, which would have been the People's Action Movement, wasn't able to come up with an alternative candidate, so they kept winning, you know. And that's pretty much how it goes. So I hear people that say that they're concerned about the 5-star thing. I have similar concerns, but you can decide that because we feel that way, that's the way it's supposed to be. It's a process that is required to change it, you know.
At the end of the day, the people vote, so.
Yeah.
Control, I think you termed it the control decline model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right.
That continues.
No, the control decline was really talking about the model of comparison in terms of how he was able to do it, because most of the long tenures have been in the case of both Dominica and St. Kitts and Nevis. You get into power with a few seats and then you add more, and then that helps to keep you in power because then you can hold on to them. In the case of Prime Minister Gonzalez, his thing was very traditional because he went into power with a lot of seats. The first election, he lost a few. And he basically has held on to all of those. I mean, he gained one now, but that's not a significantly huge swing because it is essentially the seat has 13 votes, right? And he's now won it by 1.
Yeah. On this same point, what do you think of them now for the first time since I think 1998 or 96? I think it's 98 is the last time that St. Vincent's had
an unpopular government.
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen the data, but I've heard people saying that it's unpopular. What happened election night, I crashed before because they were counting real slow. So I crashed before there because I'm having some challenges with this time difference. So by the time they were at 11 o'clock, it was 4 in the morning and I was falling asleep. So I had to duck out. So I never really heard what the numbers were, but I've subsequently heard that it is an unpopular government.
Yeah.
Unpopular governments happen few and far in between in the Caribbean. And the last time they had one in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the election was called early.
Right.
On that basis, I would not be surprised if the election is called early. I would not be surprised if Dr. Gonzalez shortened his term and gives over leadership to someone else. And that person calls the early election. Because it's hard to ignore that reality. And as much as you might say it's COVID, it's hard to ignore the reality that more people voted against you than voted for you. So the key occasions would have been in the case of Guyana.
Right.
Before they changed their constitution, they had a situation like that. Grenada had that situation in the 1970s where they had Gary won a majority of seats and a minority of votes, and a few days after they had a revolution. They had it in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Dr. Gonzalez brought out the people on the street and they marched and so on in there. Same thing in St. Kitts and Nevis. When they had that situation in an election, Denzel Douglas brought out people on the streets and essentially they changed the course of time. I don't know whether Friday can motivate people to come out on the streets now. I tend to think not. And then that raises the question as to what does this popular majority mean. So I'm inclined to think that I believe it will not be a full 5-year term, consistent with what happened in 1998, which is the example that you gave.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, Peter, there are 10 more questions that we could ask, but we could go on
forever. We're just out of time.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, trying to stick to the time because sometimes we go out like a half hour later because the people don't leave and the people keep talking, so we keep going. But we're gonna end at the correct time tonight. Peter, thank you so much for coming.
Appreciate it.
I hope you come again. I know that I already cut into your time tonight. It's like 1 o'clock there now.
12, yeah. Yeah, he's also
Yeah, he literally got on a plane today. He got off a plane, got on a train, and came straight here. So
lovely.
Me panicking. So thank you. Thank you also to you, the viewers. Thank you for coming again today. Thank you for those who shared, who commented, who asked questions. And if nothing else, I hope that this program develops an interest in politics to those of you who think the topic is stuffy. It really isn't. I say this every week. Politics is simply about all aspects of our lives, and we hope to do some episodes which will bring that concept across in some way so everybody can understand why they should have a curiosity for political life in general. So keep sharing our page, invite everyone that you know to join right here next Sunday at 5 p.m. Thank you, Peter. Thank you,
Okay,
Terry.
take care. Good chatting with you guys.
Over to you.
Terry.
Just, yeah.